The current long-term economic situation in the US is bleak as Trump extends his tariffs, but he's convinced his frothing base of brainless nationalist drones that somehow they got a huge win out of the recent round of negotiations with Europe. And while it is true that the US will bring in more revenue from these deals, those who still haven't taken the 3 minutes it takes to understand tariffs or how they actually work are trying to tell you why it's just so cool that the guy who stole their home furnishings now has all this walking around money.
A wise guy, eh?
Salutations, fellow nerds. I'm Rick Y, and today is July 31st, 2025. I know the uploading schedule has been a bit spotty lately, and I have to admit that uploading a video of me repeating myself about Epstein, nobody's really clamoring for that right now. So that one's going to have to keep cooking in the oven for a bit, and we'll check back on that one later. I've also been trying to get back to work on my book, because honestly, I haven't had the bandwidth for it recently. I'm within days of having my wife back home again from her deployment, and that should help me tackle more of these little side quests of mine. And while some of you have voiced concern over my well-being and my coping mechanisms, let me assure you, I love every minute of this. In the meantime, in the world of economic news, positive narratives are fewer and farther between. This morning, Trump has extended his tariffs on Mexico, which is where most American car manufacturing takes place. So you can expect auto prices and their component parts to go up. Jerome Powell has chosen to maintain interest rates where they are, which should shock no one given the shock to the system that Trump just delivered. And it's still not clicking for a lot of people that while tariffs do in fact bring money into the U.S., they fail to understand where that money is actually coming from. It would be beneficial for them to figure that out as soon as humanly possible because we are currently in the calm before the proverbial storm. Trump has chosen to keep his tariffs on Mexico, whose manufacturing exports to the U.S. has hit a record $475 billion in 2023, driven by automotive, electronics, aerospace, and medical device production. A large share of Mexico's export-oriented manufacturing involves U.S. firms or subsidiaries. So what's the status quo? 25% tariffs on auto imports and fentanyl-linked goods. How many fentanyl-linked goods we are officially purchasing from Mexico is kind of beyond me. 50% tariffs on steel, aluminum, and copper, and no escalation to the planned 30% tariffs that were scheduled to begin tomorrow. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum agreed to lift various non-tariff trade barriers in exchange for the extension, though details on the specific reforms weren't really disclosed. Markets jumped on the news mostly because they expected things to get worse, and they were relieved that for now, we're just going to be treading water. Now, what does that mean for us regular people? Well, if you're buying a car that was assembled in Mexico, and the chances are you are, that 25% tariff doesn't just vanish into the ether. It gets baked into the sticker price. Same goes for the electronics, appliances, and even some medical devices. Steel and copper, well, that hits construction and infrastructure costs, which means anything from a water heater to a brand new home just got a little bit more expensive. Again. Across the pond, Trump returned from his rather musical visit from Scotland and the EU to negotiate trade deals and tariffs that, again, he imposed unilaterally. The negotiations produced a partial trade deal. Most EU goods will now face 15% U.S. tariffs, while key sectors like aircraft parts, pharmaceuticals, and semiconductors get carve-outs. The EU pledged massive U.S. investments in energy purchases. This honestly looks like a lopsided deal for Europe in just about every way. The deal tripled tariff exposure for EU exporters from around 5% to 15%, yet crucial industries like autos still face duties. Meanwhile, the U.S. gains tariff removal on most of its industrial goods. According to outlets like The Guardian, critics, especially in France, say that the EU folded under pressure. French leaders even called the accord a dark day or Suez moment, accusing Brussels of capitulating rather than bargaining from strength. And to make matters worse, many of the deal's details remain unsettled and not legally binding. And if negotiations collapse, the 30% tariffs may still go into effect as soon as tomorrow. So enjoy the good market news this morning, because I just cannot guarantee how long it'll last. This brings me back to the core issue of tariffs themselves, because the administration is touting this as a big win. They're claiming that we'll make billions over the next few years, but what they aren't telling you is that they're going to be making that money off of your back and your wallet, not Europe's. not Mexico's. And I'm sure that's going to start making a lot more sense the closer that we get to making your holiday purchases this year. These are taxes. This is economic cosplay. We're cutting the top off of a blanket and sewing it to the bottom and declaring it longer. Anybody in your life who is currently cheering on money made from the tariffs is applauding higher taxes being implemented on themselves, all to avoid raising your actual taxes to pay down the national debt. It's honestly wild to see people who claim to hate taxes get so hyped about tariffs. Then again, maybe it's not that wild. It doesn't seem terribly difficult to fool some of these folks. We're talking about concepts that require education beyond the 5th grade. So, maybe I shouldn't expect too much.
We won with poorly educated. I love the poorly educated.
Because of all of this uncertainty, Jerome Powell has decided to keep interest rates the same, much to Trump's growing chagrin. The Trump-appointed chair affirmed that the current restrictive policy stance is appropriate, noting that while economic growth has softened, the labor market remains strong and inflation is still above the Fed's 2% goal. He pointed to tariff-induced inflation risks, noting that price increases caused by tariffs are only partially reflected in consumer prices so far, but said more data is needed to assess how persistent those effects will be. While Powell didn't rule out a rate cut in September, he made no commitments and emphasized that further decisions will depend on incoming data. Here's the kicker, though. One of the biggest misconceptions people have is thinking that Jerome Powell alone controls interest rates. He doesn't. He's the chair, not a monarch. The Federal Open Market Committee, or FOMC, is the body that sets U.S. monetary policy, including interest rates, and it consists of 12 voting members at any given time. 7 of those members of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors include Powell himself. These are appointed by the president and then confirmed by the Senate. The other 5 voting seats come from the 12 regional Federal Reserve Bank presidents. The New York Fed president always votes, and the remaining 4 seats rotate among the other regional presidents, like those from Chicago, Dallas, and St. Louis. The system isn't just bureaucratic window dressing. It ensures the process is democratic and not top-down. It preserves institutional independence. It incorporates a range of regional and sectoral perspectives, and it provides critical checks and balances. It's important to understand that Jerome Powell doesn't just snap his fingers and set interest rates. He chairs a committee. They meet, argue, debate, and vote. Powell guides the process, but he's not a financial king. He's more like a conductor trying to keep the brass section from overpowering the strings. The decision to keep rates steady passed with a 9-2 vote, a rare split. 2 Fed governors, Christopher Waller and Michelle Bowman, dissented, both arguing for a 25 basis point rate cut. That marks the most internal dissent within the Fed since 1993, and it spotlights growing tension over how different members view economic risks. Jerome Powell and the Fed are standing firm. No rate cuts, at least for now. Economic signals remain mixed. Inflation is elevated, trade shocks are emerging, but jobs are still holding steady. Tariffs remain a key wild card. Their full impact on inflation is still being assessed. And despite political pressure from Trump, the Fed is reaffirming its independence and commitment to data-driven decision-making. Because of all of this and the fact that his little problem involving a certain private island just won't go away like a little booger on the tip of his finger that just keeps flipping to the other side of his finger when he tries to flick it, I can only imagine what kind of tantrum Trump is going to throw tomorrow. It's the end of the week, and he's got a whole lineup of political punching bags he needs to distract everyone with. Hopefully Jerome Powell still has a job by next week, and no new surprise tariffs are slapped on anyone in the meantime. Anyway, if you enjoy the content and all the little updates, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. And if you think it's worth sharing, send the video to someone who could use a dissenting voice every now and again. I know some of y'all didn't like to make noise or they don't like arguing, but employ these fun little updates instead. Thanks for watching, and remember, Trump is in the Epstein files. Y'all come back now. You hear?